So, welcome to the Wiggin Sessions. This is surviving and thriving in the post-pandemic economy. Theoretically, I think we have the Delta variant to worry about, but now we're in episode 53, and we're featuring Byron King, who has been a guest of ours, I think 3 times now, and the last time was right before the election. So we're going to have a lot to catch up on tonight. But what I would like to do is start right off with the old right, because Byron and I have had this conversation like maybe 5 or 10 times. And I'm very interested in this citizen representative, which is what the old right was really about. So Byron, welcome, first of all.
Thank you.
Yeah, and maybe you could just start off with like a Thomas Flynn, Garrett, maybe H.L. Mencken kind of overview, and just get us up to like the 50s when they went out of fashion.
Well, first of all, it's great to be with you. We haven't spoken in a long time, and so it's very nice to be back. Second, when we start talking about like the old right, it was really sort of like the old constitutionalists. These were sort of the residual of kind of that sort of founding ethic of America that lasted intellectually into like the middle of the 20th century. And like you said, it takes it up to about the 1950s. But there were several people who were very, very influential. John T. Flynn, for example, was a terrific thinker and a great, very harsh critic of Franklin Roosevelt for a variety of reasons. I mean, it was just he had no love at all for Roosevelt. Garrett, as you mentioned, much the same thing. Excellent writers. They wrote for very, very prominent.
John Flynn was the editor of the Saturday
Evening Post, which was
the largest circulation at the time.
It was. I mean, it was sort of the national. It was the national news, basically. The Saturday Evening Post, and I mean, today, we have all these networks and we have the internet, and it's all sliced and diced, and everybody has their favorite little niche or whatever. But way back when, I mean, a magazine like the Saturday Evening Post really controlled a lot of the national narrative. H.L. Mencken, I mean, he's iconic in terms of, and so I in a way, these guys were these guys came in a sense they were fighting the early decades of progressivism. I mean, the U.S. had evolved, from its colonial days and through the 19th century. You had your Gilded Age, the rise of industrialism. You had the big trusts and everything, and the progressives came along and they said, "Oh, this is not, the good old days of, yeoman farmers, growing tobacco and corn and wheat. It's a big complex country filled with railroads and telegraphs and complex industries. We need experts to run everything." And you had somebody like, and let's go back a little bit further. Let's go to Woodrow Wilson. Wilson was very disdainful of the American Constitution, and in many respects of the colonial sort of American experiment. He thought that the U.S. Constitution and that whole system was an outgrowth of the British monarchy, but it came before the development of the parliamentarian system that you saw in Britain much later. And so he thought that the U.S. was this sort of unformed, unfinished type of governance. And so with his progressivism, he tried to just manage it from the top down. We're going to, with his 2 terms, we're going to have experts in government doing everything. And Wilson's big thing, what really gave him a grip on the country was World War I, because nothing unites a country like a nice war, right? And so anyhow, out of all this came that wave of post-war progressivism in the 20s, and then with the Great Depression and the crash, in came Roosevelt, who had who was the understudy of Woodrow Wilson. I mean, Roosevelt was the Assistant Secretary of the Navy in Wilson's administration. And when I say the Assistant Secretary, he ran the Navy, because the Secretary of the Navy was this guy from North Carolina named Josephus Daniels, who was, he was just a crazy guy who didn't know anything about the Navy. But Wilson ran the Navy, and Wilson did a lot. Or when I say Wilson, I'm sorry, Franklin Roosevelt ran the Navy, learned a lot from Wilson about how to run things. And then when Roosevelt came into power in the 1930s, I mean, he just started to micromanage the whole country with his, brain trust and these experts that he brought in. And along come these people like John Flynn, Garrett Garrett, H.L. Mencken.
Yeah, their belief was that the representatives in the House should only be there for a couple of years, and they would have to be beholden to the rules that they passed when they went back home. But now we have a president who's been there for 50 years. Like, what happened to that idea?
Well, in the early days of, the early America, the early 1800s, I mean, for the most part, if you were a member of Congress, you got elected, you went off to Washington, and I mean, then you were days, weeks, or even months away from the home district, depending on, where you were from. I mean, it was sort of you would go off to Washington. And often we say today, gee, it's a shame that the founding fathers didn't put term limits in the Constitution. I say that too. I mean, I wish we had them. I think the thought never crossed their mind, because the idea was that if you're from Massachusetts and you go down to Washington, well, not to Washington, I mean, they didn't have Washington back then, but you go down to Philadelphia to run the country, you're not going to be going back and forth like today. You didn't just jump on the Amtrak, or you don't just jump on, United Airlines and fly back and forth or something. You didn't have Nancy Pelosi flying back and forth on the Air Force Boeing 757 that she does every week out to her vineyard in Napa Valley, and so they didn't. I guess they didn't think about it. It's hard to know what was in their heads at the time. But then along came the 30s, and here is all of a sudden, big government coming along, and really, a lot. There was a whole national line of thinking that, this Constitution thing, this capitalism thing, it's a failure. It's failed. We can see it just in the nature of the Great Depression, and we have to set up all these agencies to run the country. And so this is where many of these alphabet soup agencies came from, the Federal Communications Commission, the Federal Power Commission, which is now, FERC, or, I mean, it was just a whole list of alphabet soup agencies. But guys like Garrett Garrett, guys like John T. Flynn, H.L. Mencken were there saying, we're taking the rights and the freedoms away from Americans, and from the American civil citizens. Now the answer to that from the people in Washington and all the brainiacs from the Brain Trust was, well, those people out there in the hills and the valleys and the factory towns and stuff, they're too dumb to run their own affairs anyhow. So I mean, there was really a definite class distinction going on there. I mean. Karl Marx got a few things right, and one of them had to do with the stratification of different classes within a society, and if you just want to bring it to today, I mean, a lot of America's problems today, it's red state, blue state, this, that. No, it's a real class.
It's all bullshit made up by the media, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, when somebody says, "Oh, it doesn't matter that that we've deindustrialized the country because we're just going to take our dollars and buy things made elsewhere cheaper." Well, really, I mean, was it really such a good idea to deindustrialize the country and literally put tens of millions of people away from their jobs, break entire cultures that took a century to create? I mean, was that such a good idea? And you talk about, here we are, the pandemic, we're a year and a half into it. I mean, yeah, sure, we've got the vaccines and such that are being made in the U.S., but how much of America's medical supply is made in America? I mean, we've just spent a year and a half. The country's being sick. The country is sick. if you get the bug, oh, you've got a respirator and you've got tubes and this and that. How many of those plastic tubes are made in America? How many of the face masks are made in America? How many of the PPE that the doctors and the nurses are? How much of that stuff's made in America? Not that much. Where's most of it come from? Guess where? China, but other places, India too. We've destroyed the industrial foundation of the country, and that's just on medicines. The pills you take, the antibiotics you take, they're made someplace else. The aspirin you take is made someplace else. The vitamin C you take is made someplace. It's not made in the United States. If you go to the drugstore and you buy a big jar of vitamin C pills to, get your vitamins, that stuff's all made in China or India. Or at least the precursors are. Maybe they put it in a plastic bottle in a bottling plant in someplace. But So if you talk about people like Garrett, John Flynn, whatever, they were railing against that. And in fact, one of the great lines from John Flynn came in the mid '50s, where somebody said, "Well, Mr. Flynn, what would you do to fix what's wrong with the country?" And he says, "Well, we should have a constitutional amendment that says that no Supreme Court ruling since 1934 would have any effect," something like that. And so sometimes you wonder, maybe it's not such a bad.
He was in the editor of the Saturday Evening Post until like 1955 or something. Like he was a leading voice in America for a long time.
Right.
Yeah. And then that entire idea disappeared.
It was swamped. It was just wiped off the face of the earth like a great flood came along. It just subsumed into the intellectual